The morning sun cast a golden hue over the dusty outskirts of the village, but for 12-year-old Ayana, there was no warmth in its light. She stood barefoot on the old wooden floor of her grandmother's hut, dressed in a delicate white gown that had once belonged to someone else's daughter. Her veil itched. Her eyes were dry, not because she wasn't sad, but because her body had already run out of tears. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Women whispered, men looked away. Everyone knew what was about to happen. She was about to marry Mr. Elliot Langston, a white man almost 6 times her age, a 70-year-old stranger from another world, another country, another life, a man who barely spoke the local language, a man with silver hair, cold eyes, and a handshake that made her skin crawl. But he had money, and Ayana's family had none. 2 weeks ago, her little brother had fallen ill. Fever, chills, uncontrollable seizures. The clinic refused to admit him without payment. Her mother pleaded, begged, sold her sewing machine, her wedding ring, even Ayana's school books. But it wasn't enough. That's when Elliot came. He had been staying in a private lodge in the mountains. An old American investor, they said. No one knew why he was in their region. He wasn't a missionary. He didn't speak of God or charity, but he had cash. And when he saw Ayana walking barefoot through the market buying medicine with coins, something in his gaze lingered. The next day, he showed up at their home with an offer, a bride price large enough to cover her brother's treatment and leave enough for rent, food, and clothing for a year. Her mother had refused, screamed, thrown things, but by nightfall her brother's fever had worsened. They had no choice, and Ayana, barely past childhood, whispered the words, "I'll do it." The ceremony was small. Her grandmother tied a thin thread of beads around her neck. Elliot, dressed in an expensive black suit, wore a subtle smile. He said nothing except yes when the elder asked if he took Ayana as his wife. She said nothing at all. There was no kiss, just a nod, and then silence. That night, Ayana sat on the edge of a clean bed in a strange guest house. Elliot sat across from her, reading a book in a language she couldn't understand. He didn't come close, didn't touch her. He simply handed her a bowl of soup and said, "You should eat." It was the first time he'd spoken directly to her. His voice was gentle, too gentle. It confused her. That night he slept in the room next door, locking the door between them, from his side. Ayana stayed awake, holding a photo of her brother and wondering, what does he want from me, if not what all the others whispered? The days that followed were the strangest of Ayana's young life. She had expected cruelty, obedience, silence. Instead, Elliot treated her like glass, not fragile out of pity, but valuable. He gave her a room of her own, brought her clean dresses in soft colors, served her tea at exactly 4 p.m. each day, with honey and a small cookie wrapped in linen. He never touched her. He never raised his voice. He never looked at her like the others did, and somehow, that made everything worse. She didn't know what to expect anymore. On the 3rd night, she peeked through the cracked door of the library. He was there again, as always, sitting in the same brown armchair, reading under the golden light of an old lamp. But this time, she saw something strange. He was staring into a mirror, not shaving, not brushing his hair, just staring. His face was tired, paler than usual. His lips trembled slightly as if whispering something under his breath. Ayana couldn't hear. She backed away. The next morning, Elliot invited her to walk with him through the forest trail behind the lodge. He gave her boots, a scarf, a notebook. "You should write," he said, "even if it's just your thoughts." Ayana squinted. "Why?" "Because stories make sense of things." He paused, then added quietly, "And I think you'll need that soon." The way he said it, as if he knew something she didn't, chilled her. By the fifth day, Ayana noticed something else. Elliot kept a room locked at the far end of the hallway, a heavy wooden door with a brass handle that didn't turn. She asked once. He smiled faintly. "Some doors aren't ready to open yet." But Ayana wasn't a child anymore. She had been poor. She had seen death. She had said goodbye to innocence the day she wore a wedding dress meant for someone 3 times her age. So that night, while Elliot went into town, she picked the lock. Inside she found a museum of secrets. Photographs lined the walls, children, dozens of them, all from different countries, some smiling, some not. Each had a date beneath their frame. Some dates had an X marked over them, some had none. In the corner a wooden trunk, inside, more notebooks, letters. She pulled one out. "Dear Marisol, you're probably 17 now. I still think about you, your laughter. I hope you kept the violin. I'm sorry I had to leave so soon." Another read, "To Chica, the stars were always brightest when you sang. I hope you found your mother. I hope you still sing." And one more, fresh, barely a week old. "To Ayana, you don't know yet, but you will. I just hope I live long enough to see you smile for real." Her breath caught in her throat. She clutched the paper, eyes wide. Why was her name here? Why had he written her a goodbye letter? Before she even found it? She turned and nearly screamed. Elliot stood in the doorway. He had returned early. His expression wasn't angry, just tired. "I suppose it's time you knew," he said. Ayana clutched the letter to her chest. "Knew what?" Elliot leaned on the door frame, exhaling heavily. "That I didn't marry you for me," he said. "I married you. For you." Ayana stood frozen in the dimly lit room, still holding the letter. The heavy air was filled with the scent of cedar wood and something else, faded memories. Elliot stepped into the room and gently closed the door behind him. He didn't scold her, didn't ask why. Instead, he walked to one of the photos on the wall, an image of a girl in a yellow dress laughing under a blossom tree. Her name was Amira, he said quietly. From Morocco. She had a stutter, but when she read poetry, you'd swear God himself was speaking through her. He smiled, but it didn't last. She died at 14, malaria. Her village had no clean water. He pointed to another, Leon, from southern China, abandoned at birth. I paid for her surgeries. She wanted to become a nurse. She didn't make it either. Ayana's mouth trembled. "Are these all girls you married?" "No," he said firmly. "They were all girls I found. Girls in danger. Girls being sold, forgotten, thrown away. I didn't marry any of them." He turned to face her fully. "You're the first." Ayana's eyes narrowed. Then, "Why me?" Elliot walked to a small chair and eased himself into it, with a sigh that sounded like it carried 70 years of regret. "Because you were going to be married off anyway. You just didn't know it yet." Her heart dropped. He continued, "I'd heard rumors in the village. A foreign businessman, Russian. He'd been buying wives under the table, girls even younger than you. Your family was in debt. He was going to come to your mother with an offer." Ayana stumbled back. You're lying. I wish I were. His voice cracked, just slightly. I knew I had only two options. Let that man get to you first, or get there before him. Ayana stared at the walls again. These weren't trophies. They were memorials. For the next hour, Elliot told her everything. How he'd spent the last 20 years traveling the world, searching for vulnerable girls in desperate situations, orphans, street children, abandoned daughters, and doing what little he could. Sometimes he paid for their schooling, sometimes he built wells, sometimes he adopted them legally, other times the system made it impossible. So he worked quietly, silently, off the record. Ayana interrupted once. Why not use your money publicly? Build an organization, a school. You're rich, right? He smiled bitterly. I was. I sold most of it to fund these missions. But even money has limits when the law protects the powerful and punishes the poor. I learned early, the only way to reach girls like you, trapped in places the world forgot, was to go there myself. He looked her dead in the eye. I married you because that was the only way I could buy time, to protect you, to give you a choice, one you were never going to have. That night, Ayana didn't sleep. She sat by her window, legs pulled to her chest, the letter still in her hand. She thought about the life she almost lived, about the quiet American man who gave her a contract instead of a command, a pen instead of a cage, a choice instead of chains. And she realized something that made her chest ache. He didn't save her because he had to. He saved her because no one else would. The next morning, Ayana woke before the sun. She walked downstairs to find Elliot already in the kitchen. He was slicing fruit with the same care one might use to fold an old love letter, quiet, focused, as if the world outside didn't exist. He didn't look up, just said softly, "Sleep okay?" Ayana hesitated. "No." He nodded once. "Good. Means you're still human." They ate breakfast in silence. That day, Elliot gave her a choice. Go back to her village, or stay until she felt ready to decide what came next. No pressure, no conditions. He even handed her a small envelope, thick with cash. "For your mother," he said, "and your brother's medicine." Ayana stared at the money. "So that's it? You just let me go?" He met her gaze. "You were never mine to keep." That broke something in her, because deep down she had been waiting for the other shoe to drop. The cruelty, the betrayal, the moment he would take what the world always said men like him wanted. But it never came. Instead, he offered her freedom, the one thing no man had ever offered without a price. And still, she didn't leave, not right away. In the days that followed, Ayana stayed at the lodge. She cleaned, she read, she wrote in the notebook he gave her. She wandered the trails behind the house and listened to Elliot's strange, heavy breathing as he sat in the library reading old letters from long-lost girls. One afternoon, she found him asleep in his chair. A small bottle of pills had fallen from his pocket. She picked it up. The label read, Stage 4, Terminal. Her throat tightened. Suddenly everything made sense. The rushed marriage, the letters, the urgency, the soft sadness in his eyes. He wasn't saving her just for her sake. He was dying, and he didn't want to leave this world until he had given one more girl a future. That night, Ayana sat beside his chair and asked the question she had been avoiding. "Are you scared?" He didn't answer right away. Then with a distant look in his eyes, he said, "No." I've lived enough years to know fear is a privilege. What scares me isn't death. He turned to her. It's dying before I've done enough. Ayana looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time saw not a man or a savior or a foreigner, but something she hadn't seen in anyone before, a soul that had refused to grow numb. Over the next few weeks they formed something strange, something that didn't have a name. It wasn't love exactly. It wasn't father and daughter. It wasn't husband and wife. It was something softer, wiser, built not on possession or roles, but on choice. Mutual, complicated, scarred choice. Ayana began teaching him words in her language. He taught her how to cook pasta. They argued over books. She laughed for the first time in months. One day he said, "I think you'd be a good teacher." She raised an eyebrow. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he replied. "You see people. That's rare." By the 7th week, he handed her a folder. Inside were documents, school applications, scholarships, legal papers, a visa, all in her name. "You're leaving," he said, "to study." Ayana's hands trembled. "And you?" He smiled softly. "I'll be here for a while." Then he placed something in her palm, the beaded necklace her grandmother gave her on her wedding day. "Don't forget where you started," he said, "but don't ever let it trap you." They hugged, just once, and it felt like saying goodbye to an entire lifetime in a single breath. Three years later, Ayana stood at the front of a classroom in a city far from the village where her story began. Her students, refugee girls, many younger than she'd been, sat wide-eyed as she read them stories in 3 languages. At the end of the lesson, she pulled out a photo, a man in a black suit, silver hair, eyes tired but kind. "This," she said, "is the reason I'm here." One girl raised her hand. "Was he your father?" Ayana paused. "No," she said. "He was my beginning." Later that night, alone in her dorm room, Ayana opened the last letter he had sent before passing. Inside was a single sentence. "Sometimes saving a life means giving it back to the one it belonged to." She cried, but it wasn't sorrow. It was gratitude, because she had been bought, not as a bride, not as property, but as a chance. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a victim of someone else's story. She was writing her own.